You're 55 years old, sitting in a parked car in your own driveway, finishing a thought you started having at a meeting 3 hours ago. The engine's off, the groceries are melting, and somewhere underneath the thinking, there's a low hum you've had since you were about 7, the feeling that you're running a slightly different operating system than everyone else, and you've spent your whole life translating yourself down into theirs. I'm Frank, and if that car in the driveway feels familiar, this one's about you. Specifically, about the Gen X guy whose brain has always been a little too fast, a little too loud, a little too good at noticing things no one asked him to notice. There's a study out of the journal Intelligence that I want to walk you through, because once you see what it found, a lot of your life stops looking like a personality and starts looking like a system. A system that was never named for you, a system that built your career and is quietly billing you for it now. Let's start with what you actually do. Not what you feel, what you do. You walk into a room and within about 4 seconds you've clocked who's tense, who's lying, who's about to interrupt who, and where the exits are. You don't try to do this. It just happens, the way other people hear music. You finish other people's sentences in your head 2 beats before they finish them out loud, and then you sit there, waiting, pretending you're still listening fresh. You edit every email 3 times before you send it, not because you're insecure, but because you can see the 4 ways it could be misread, and you're trying to close all 4 doors at once. You over-prepare for meetings that don't need preparing for. You replay conversations from 1994. You can hold a grudge against a guy who cut you off in traffic in a town you haven't lived in for 20 years. You're the friend who remembers everyone's kids' names, their surgeries, their job changes, and you assume nobody remembers yours. And you're usually right, because you never told them. And here's the part that might sting a little. You're probably very successful at something, and you're absolutely convinced that any day now, someone's going to figure out you've been winging it the whole time. Now, the study. In 2018, a researcher named Ruth Karpinski and her team published a paper called High Intelligence, a risk factor for psychological and physiological overexcitabilities. They surveyed members of American Mensa. To get into Mensa, you need to score in the top 2% on an IQ test, roughly 132 or higher. So this is a sample of people whose brains, by the only crude measure we have, run hot. What Karpinski found was not what most people expect. Among that high IQ sample, 26.7% reported a diagnosed mood disorder. 20% reported a diagnosed anxiety disorder. National averages at the time were sitting around 10% for each. So we're talking roughly 2 to almost 3 times the rate. Not slightly higher, multiples higher. And it wasn't just the head. About a third of the Mensa sample reported environmental allergies, compared to roughly 11% nationally. Triple. The immune system was lit up too. Karpinski's theory for why is the part I want you to sit with. She calls it the hyperbrain-hyperbody pattern. The same nervous system that lets you pick up on 1,000 tiny signals a day, the shift in someone's tone, the inconsistency in a report, the smell of dust in a hotel room, doesn't have an off switch. It runs all the time. When it runs all the time on social input, you get rumination and worry that climb into mood and anxiety disorders. When it runs on physical input, you get an immune system swinging at shadows. Scientific American covered this with a headline that pretty much sums it up. Bad news for the highly intelligent. They confirm the numbers and the mechanism. The smart engine and the suffering engine are the same engine. The smart brain isn't sitting above the mood problem. The smart brain, idling, is the mood problem. Stay with me, because this is where it gets interesting for you specifically. Because nobody told you any of this in 1978. No school counselor pulled your parents aside and said, "Look, his system runs hot. Here's what to watch for." If you were a kid who tested well, you got a sticker, maybe a pizza party, maybe a teacher who liked you and a parent who said, "He's a smart one," at. Thanksgiving in a tone that landed somewhere between proud and suspicious. There's a piece in Psychology Today from late 2025 that puts a name on what happens next. It's about gifted adults who grew up in families where the giftedness wasn't recognized for what it was. The pattern described as a kind of automatic self-editing. The kid figures out, fast, that running at full speed makes the people around him uncomfortable. So he learns to dumb himself down, slow his sentences, hide the vocabulary, lose on purpose at board games, pretend he didn't already know the answer. And he gets really, really good at it. So good that 30 years later, he doesn't know he's doing it. He just knows that every conversation feels like work. Every room feels like a performance. And somewhere in the back of his head, a voice is going, they don't know who you actually are. And if they did, they wouldn't like it. That piece links the pattern directly to elevated social anxiety and what most people call imposter syndrome in adulthood. The guys it describes are plenty competent. They spent the formative years of their life editing themselves down for an audience that never asked them to. And now they can't tell which version is real. Sound like anyone you shave with? Before I keep going, I've been working on something on the side. A book called Psychology of Gen X. It gets into a lot of this, the stuff that got wired into you young and what it's doing to you now. The patterns you can't quite explain about yourself. Links in the description if you want to look. And to everyone watching and sharing this stuff, genuinely, thank you. If you want to go a step further, there's a Patreon too. Subscribers get early access to videos with no ads, and you help keep the channel running. That link's right there as well. QR code's on screen. Okay, back to it. Let's talk about the money, because this is where the high IQ Gen X guy gets weird. There's a longitudinal study out of Sweden, the IDA project, published in 2014 that tracked men from early adolescence through midlife outcomes. They looked at men in their mid-40s and compared income, education, and life outcomes against the IQ scores those same men had as kids. For the men in the sample, income rose with IQ in a steady, graded way. The smarter you tested at 13, the more you earned at 45, on average. Master's degree attainment was far more common in the high IQ group than in the average group. But here's the catch. Only about a third of those high IQ men actually finished a master's, and around a fifth of them didn't even finish 3-year high school. A fifth of the top sliver of brains in the country. And this is the part I want you to really hear. Within that high IQ group, parental social class did not predict their adult income. Family money didn't determine the outcome. Something else did. Something internal. So what's the something internal? Look around at the guys you knew in high school who were the smart ones. Some of them are running departments. Some of them are running companies. And some of them are on their 4th career, drinking too much, 3 relationships deep, brilliant on a bar stool at midnight, and unable to sit through a Tuesday morning. The IQ didn't sort them. Something else did. I'd argue, and this is me reading the Karpinski study against the Swedish data, that what sorted them is whether the hyperbrain found a track to run on or whether it spent 40 years running on itself. The guys who landed on a problem big enough to absorb the engine, engineering, medicine, building a company, mastering a craft, those guys look like success stories. The engine had somewhere to go. The guys who didn't find that track, the engine ran on their own life. It rewrote every conversation, audited every choice, drafted 12 versions of every decision, and exhausted itself by noon. Same horsepower, different track. Wildly different 40 years. Now layer on the next thing. Because brains don't just need a track, they need people. And this is where being a Gen X guy in 2026 gets specifically hard. AARP published a friendship study in 2026 focused on men over 50. The headline finding? Men over 50 are lonelier than women over 50. Not surprising. But within the men, Gen X men reported feeling lonelier than boomer men. The guys ahead of you in line have, on average, more people in their lives than you do. The framing the study used. Men connect shoulder to shoulder, women connect face to face. Which means a lot of male friendships are built around doing. Watching the game, working on the car, going to the range, going to the show. Strong on shared passion. Light on personal disclosure. The phrase the study uses is high passion, low vulnerability. 95% of men in that study said friends were essential to a happy life. 95. And the same men, when asked when they last had a real conversation about something personal, went quiet. Now take a high IQ Gen X guy who already self-edits, already overreads every room, already assumes nobody wants the actual him, and drop him into a friendship culture where the rule is talk about the Niners and don't mention your marriage. What you end up with is a foxhole with snacks and a man inside it who hasn't said his own name in years. There's a 2026 paper in Frontiers in Sociology looking at Gen X, Y, and Z men together. The piece on Gen X men specifically says emotional distress from earlier in their lives is persisting into midlife, and traditional masculinity norms are keeping it from being named or addressed. Their recommendation is what they call emotional literacy and offline peer support, which is researcher language for these guys need to learn the words and the need to use them in person with other guys out loud. And there's a bigger longitudinal piece, Infurna and colleagues, covered by psychiatrist.com, looking at over 53,000 people across the US and 13 European countries, ages 45 to 65. American Gen X and boomers in midlife are reporting some of the highest loneliness in the entire study, higher than their European peers, higher than the silent generation was at the same age. Whatever's happening to middle-aged American men, it's specific, it's measurable, and it's worse than it used to be. Diablo magazine cited a finding from the Roots of Loneliness project that the pandemic increased loneliness for Gen X men by 130%, more than doubled. And nobody really threw them a parade about it, because Gen X men, as a rule, do not request parades. Which gets us to the trait that's at the center of all of this: self-reliance. There's a 2025 study by Lisitsa and Kagan, published in Cyberpsychology, Behavior, and Social Networking, that ran a sample of men across generations. For Gen X men specifically, they found a direct negative link between social media use and life satisfaction. Not mediated, not indirect, direct. The more the Gen X guys in the sample leaned on social media, the lower they rated their lives. The authors tie this to self-reliance as a masculine trait in this generation. The story they tell is, a lot of Gen X men were raised to handle it themselves. When they need connection, they don't reach out to a human, because reaching out feels like failing at the job of being a man. So they reach for the phone. And the phone is a terrible friend. It gives the appearance of connection while extracting the actual thing. The smarter the brain, the faster it sees through the trick, and the worse the letdown lands. So here's where you are. You've got a nervous system that runs hot. You've got a 40-year habit of editing yourself down so other people are comfortable. You've got a career that may or may not have given the engine a real track to run on. You've got a friendship culture that won't let you say the actual sentence. You've got a self-reliance reflex that turns every cry for help into a private project. And you've got a phone in your pocket that is happy to absorb all of it and give you nothing back. What you're looking at there is a setup, dressed up as a personality. Now, I told you at the top this wasn't going to be a funeral. So here's the part nobody puts in these conversations. There's a Swedish study out of the Hearts Project, published in 2021, that followed 1,722 men through the retirement transition. They measured IQ in young adulthood and then tracked depressive symptoms across the years around retirement. What they found is that higher young adult IQ predicted lower post-retirement depressive symptoms, controlling for education, controlling for health. The smarter young brain was protective in the older life. Read that twice. The same trait that's been quietly running you into the ground in midlife, the constant pattern finding, the deep processing, the noticing, becomes a tailwind on the other side, if you make it through. That's the part I want you sitting with. The engine doesn't have to be the enemy forever. Karpinski's study is about what it does when it has nowhere to go. The Heart study is about what it does when it finally does. Retirement, in that data, gave a lot of these men what their 20s and 30s and 40s never did. Time. Slack. A track of their own choosing. And the brain that ate them alive for 40 years started, finally, to feed them. Which means the work in front of you is not to dumb the engine down. You tried that. You've been trying it since 1975, and you've gotten so good at it you can't fully stop. The work is to give the engine a track that isn't your own nervous system. Something to chew on that isn't you. A problem, a craft, a project, a person, a room of other guys who will let you say the actual sentence out loud. The thing that wired you to suffer is the same thing that's wired you to figure this out. You've just been pointing it at the wrong target your whole life. Quick thing before I go. Psychology of Gen X came out of doing this channel and realizing all these topics connect into one bigger story about how you got built. So to everyone who is able to get it, or anyone thinking of getting it, thank you for supporting the channel. Genuinely. If you're looking to get it for yourself, scan the Q&R code on screen right now. That's it for this one. Thanks for watching. There's another video right there on the screen. Go ahead and tap it.